Welcome to Design Talks Now, hosted by Design Pavilion, held annually in the plazas of Times Square and created to help inform the general public on architecture, design, and urban planning. I'm Eileen Shaw, producer of Design Pavilion and Design Talks. I feel like we're on a roller coaster, and if we can roll with the flow, we'll get through this global crisis, not too jostled or hurt, hopefully. And if we're wise and fortunate and vigilant, we may stay healthy and safe, and we'll look back at this as a time of great learning, epiphanies, revelations, and revolutions that bring greater clarity and understanding to our way of life and our way of work, and hopefully a healthier, kinder reset to our priorities. I believe today's panelists have been operating in this more enlightened state for a very long time. In fact, for all of their respective careers. We welcome today Norway to the conversation in a special 3-day series delving into Norway design, a symbiosis with nature. We'll take a close and detailed look into the perspective of Norway's leading architects, designers, and manufacturers. With a focus on craftsmanship, materials, and clean lines, Norwegian design has always been hugely influential worldwide. Now we'll examine how it has grown in relevance, well beyond the aesthetic, into an exemplary and greatly needed process based on our relationship with nature and the mission to serve humanity. First, we'll hear from Harriet Berg, Norway's Consul General in New York, promoting and aiding Norwegian business interests here and on the East Coast. To kick off our series today, we present Humanistic Industrial Design. And now let's begin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Harriet Berg. I'm the Norwegian Consul General here in New York, and I'm very pleased to wish you welcome to Design Talks Now on Norwegian design. We at the Norwegian Consulate General in New York have been, like all of you, forced to move into the virtual space due to the COVID crisis. That has, however, provided some opportunities as well, reaching a wider audience and more diverse audience than we normally would in the physical experience. But we do look forward to being able to meet you later at the Design Pavilion in particular. I'm very pleased that the Norwegian Design Talks is part of the Design Talks Now program. In this first 3-part series, we will hear more about humanistic industrial design. I know that the panelists today have exciting projects, also brand new ones, that they will share with you today. How can future design ensure a human-centered approach, both in production and end product? How can we incorporate nature and sustainability in our design? And how can we make people happier through the design process and products? Gareth Johnson, a big thank you to you, whom the consulate has a long-standing relationship with in the design space and who has worked to pull this together, and that will moderate the discussion. We also want to thank everyone at the Design Pavilion that has made Design Talks Now programming possible and kept conversations about the future of good design vibrant while we have faced a changing world. It's also very nice to see our partners in Norwegian design, Jan Christian Vestre, CEO of Vestre, Andreas Kjeldflot, Norwegian architect living in New York City and teaching at Columbia University, and Rachel Schiffman, architect at Snøheta's office here in New York City. I look forward to this conversation and hope that you will join us for the next 2 talks as well. Thank you.
Days without sunlight and nights without darkness. Norway is powered by nature, and so are we. We are a society built on equal opportunities, which might be the reason why we're the happiest people in the world. Our coastline, rivers, and fjords form the backbone of our main industries. That's why we are pioneers within marine technology, agriculture, and energy. Adapting new technology we must strive to design greener, better, and smarter. By exploring the exceptional, we are pushing for a new standard.
Hi, everyone. I'm Garrett Johnson, Creative Strategist in Brand Development. I'm thrilled to be here today in conversation with this compelling group of speakers, sharing their perspectives about industrial design with a humanistic approach and Norwegian sensibilities. I'm so excited to introduce Anne Rachel Schiffman. She is a director and architect at Snøhetta New York office, where she leads the studio's interior architecture efforts. Her expertise has anchored a wide range of projects, including the award-winning interior design of Calgary Central Library, the Student Learning Center of Rice University in Toronto, the SF MoMA expansion in San Francisco, the still spotting installation of the Guggenheim Museum in New York, as well as the French Laundry Kitchen expansion of Chef Thomas Keller in Younton, California. She is currently working on a pop-up restaurant in Tokyo, Japan, a collaboration between N1 Tokyo and Ghetto Gastro. For over 30 years, Snøhetta's transdisciplinary approach has manifested in work that ranges from the construction of Times Square to Oslo's Opera House, from the Willamette Falls River work to the Alexandria Calgary libraries, and projects as small as dollhouses and beehives. The practice places personal and special experience in the center of their design process. Their work engages the senses and physicality of the body, fosters social interaction, and promotes both individual and collective empowerment in the built environment. Its work focuses on biodiversity and habitat, as well as with zero emissions, has led to the practice being recognized as a leader in efforts to address climate abuse in the building industry. Next, I'd like to introduce Jan Christian Vestra, the CEO of Vestra. Prior to taking on the leadership role at Vestra, Jan Christian was a community activist who studied law and served as a political advisor to the Norwegian Democratic Labour Party. He is an impassioned promoter of more open societies and green production and has given many public talks on related topics. He is well known in Northern Europe for his views and work on building more inclusive communities through design and running a sustainable manufacturing business. He has been featured in numerous publications like Forbes and Architectural Digest discussing these global issues. Jan Christian was recently awarded the Entrepreneur of the Year award by EY for his achievements in growth, sustainability, and inclusivity. Vestra is a Norwegian manufacturer of urban furniture, but what they produce is experiences. The public right of access has a long tradition in the Scandinavian countries when it comes to outdoor recreation. In Norway, they take this for granted that urban spaces belong to everyone, and this is a mindset that seems to be taking hold internationally. The Nordic way of urban planning can be a valuable export article. This confirms the focusing on meeting places instead of just outdoor furniture has been a sensible strategy. Today, Vestra's solutions can be found in many places around the world, among them New York's Times Square, King's Cross in London, and Forum des Halles in Paris. Next, I'd like to introduce Andreas Kjeldflat. He is the founder of FranLab, a New York and Bergen-based design studio and adjunct professor at Columbia University. Prior to founding FranLab, Andreas was a project manager at the office of Toshiko Mori. He has previously worked for architecture and design firms in Oslo, Copenhagen, New York City, and Taipei, and held teaching positions at Cornell University, the University of Pennsylvania, and New York Institute of Technology. His work has been featured in publications such as Fast Company, New York Times, and exhibited at the Center of Architecture and the United Nations Palace of Nations. Andreas holds a Bachelor's of Science Engineering degree from the Technical University of Denmark and a Master's of Architecture degree from the University of Pennsylvania. FranLab is an innovation studio based in Bergen and New York City. Fueled by technology and optimism, they create objects and spaces for better futures. By leveraging product design, architecture, and systems design methodology, FranLab is able to rigorously investigate and effectively respond to complex challenges. Fram means forward in Norwegian. It sums up the mission neatly, moving things forward. And we'll start the conversation with one common thread that I find absolutely exciting about these three brands and these three personalities, is the cross-disciplinary methods involved in all of the companies and all of their approaches to work, and how this is a common thread also in Norway. Let's start with Jan Christian. How does humanity influence your cross-disciplinary approach to design?
I would say that's extremely important to us. And thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I've been really looking forward to it. It's a really important topic. So I think the way we collaborate in the Nordics has also something to do with our society. You know, the Nordic model, sharing is caring. where we actually encourage people to contribute. And we have this very democratic approach to all kind of decision-making processes. And that, of course, also has impact on how we design our cities and how we design products and how we create stuff, actually. So whether it's a Nordic value or not, I'm not sure, but I can say that it's really important in the Nordic countries. And then humanity, I think humanity is extremely important when we discuss how to design and how to build our future cities, because they should be based on more humanity, not less humanity. I see design as a tool to actually change the world. Some people find that a bit naive. They have, I have been accused of so many things. Among them is that I'm like a United Nations of street furniture. But I mean, I really think we can change the world with our street furniture. And that has to do with something very important. That is that we have to bring people together these days. I'm worried about climate changes, but to be honest, I'm even more worried about the situation we are seeing now in many countries where we face a more polarized world. People are defining other people as them, and we're talking about us and them instead of the big we. We see more conflicts, as I said, more polarized debate, more polarized climate, and that's really something to worry about. So we can bring people together by using design as a tool to create more caring meeting places, for instance, where people get to know each other, where we share life ideas, life experiences. I think we can see a less polarized world, actually, where we respect each other, where we have a more feeling of togetherness, mutual trust in the societies, and so on. And that's why humanity in design processes are so important. So using design as a tool to bring people together, and to be able to do that, we actually have to involve people in the design processes as well, not just telling them what they need. We should actually ask people what they need and how they can contribute and what we can accomplish together.
Absolutely. And traveling through Scandinavia on research, I did notice how there were public spaces with furniture that seemed to trigger delight, a sense of play, and joy in everyday experiences on the street. And I did find that most of those installations were Vestra. I find that very, very intriguing, that at the core of your value and that you achieve it on such a global level. It's fascinating to me. And Rachel, similarly, how is humanity in your approach to design just kind of baked into the philosophy of the experience of your public spaces?
You know, we're an integrated architecture, interior, and landscape firm. So our approach to design always has been informed by the local, but also the cultural conditions of a site. So there's always a dialogue between, you know, what we create and the inherent character and the condition of the site or the social identity we want to further enhance and create. Before coming to New York, I lived in Toronto, but I'm from Zurich, Switzerland. And, you know, one of the things that immediately strike you, there were hardly any non-commercial spaces out there. Everything was either a cafe, a retail, or a street, a busy street for cars. But where was the space for people to congregate, just to be, just to sit? The way you have it in Europe, for sure, and in a lot of the world beyond that. The Oslo Opera House is a good example, right? You have a relatively exclusive typography, an opera house. How do you open that up to everybody? How do you give back to the city? You make the roof of this building walkable, accessible to everybody by making it an elevated plaza.
Fascinating. And it's absolutely true. The idea that Snow had to put forward of social monuments rather than sculptural monuments, the fact that you can enjoy this shape and actually experience it is part of a human experience, and that experience shared with random individuals in a public space creates connection. And again, joy and delight. It's an amazing building. And I know many of your structures provide that in a social setting. Absolutely wonderful. And we'll get back to that idea in a second as well. Andreas, so many of your projects are amazing and really connect on a human level and solve very wicked problems. Tell us how humanity informs your multidisciplinary approach to design.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you again for having me. Pleasure to be here. To me, design is about solving problems, right? Our society and the issues are becoming more and more complex and interconnected and global. So collaboration is no longer a nice to have, but a must have, right? you have to approach it through collaborations. And it's the only way of really understanding the full picture of a situation, right? You need to bring as many disciplines and voices to the table as possible in order to get a diverse and wide perspective on the situation. And I think collaboration is the only way to unlock, innovation as well, right? In order to really arrive at novel solutions, you need to interrogate the situation from as many angles as possible. And in doing so, there is always the possibility of generating synergies and hybrid conditions and letting different disciplines learn from each other and inform each other. And so you can also start to blur these silos or boundaries. The opera example, right? Like you have landscape and a building. It's not just one or the other, right? It's physical and digital. It's our product and architecture. And I also think that, the Nordic philosophy of design always has had a strong component of user involvement, right? Where you are, in fact, elevating the client to become a co-designer, right? There is a deep conversation around the project at hand. It might not, only be stemming from the Nordics, but I think if you go back, you will see that this has always been a part of the way you approach design in Scandinavia and Norway.
We often have this sensibility, I know when working with corporate clients and things, where we respond to the data, where we look at the past and we look at human behavior and design according to that, which sometimes is effective, but sometimes we end up designing for something instead of really considering what the need is and then designing around that. So it's interesting that you have that approach in the cross-disciplinary references such as systems methodology, human studies, and even graphics and product design can really help you look at what is needed, not necessarily at what is being said or what the behavior dictates. As Thomas Edison said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So taking into considering what people want and say they want versus you as a designer having the expertise to know what is needed is so vital and important. Andreas, can you tell us a little bit about your open house project? I know that that's a concept where we had been talking about the densely populated urban settings of New York City and the growing isolation and anxiety that people are feeling, where people feel lonely almost all the time now. That concept helps to build private spaces while connecting people within the residence. How do you see that moving forward now under COVID circumstances? And how do you see that fostering connection, but still allowing people to stay healthy and have privacy?
So Open House, that's an ongoing sort of a research project that really tries to investigate housing in relationship to loneliness and social isolation. It's a project that I first presented last year at the Conscious Cities Festival in New York, but yes, has become arguably even more relevant in the current climate. Loneliness has been a growing public health issue for many years. It's called referred to as a hidden epidemic by the Red Cross. And the reason for this is in part because of the sort of subjective nature of loneliness, right? It's something that you feel. You cannot point a finger at it. And then secondly, it's also very stigmatized. It's like, it might even be one of the last true stigmas of our times, right? In a world that's obsessed with ranking social standings and quantifying your social network and your social capital. And I am quite hopeful that the current time in the midst of these isolating months will maybe give a greater awareness around the issues of loneliness and make it an easier issue to talk about and then by extension addressing. And I think there's numerous ways this project might become relevant moving forward, specifically looking at the residential environment, right? We spend about 90% of our lives indoors. And we do know, as you touched on, we do know much more about how these spaces affect us on an emotional level and how it really shapes our behaviors and our moods, even affect our interpersonal relationships with other people. So I think there's a opportunity to really elevate our homes beyond just containers of life, right? But really think of them as something that could nurture the human species. Nature is another element to this project that I think is going to become more and more relevant. We know for a long time that nature really is important for human beings, right? Like Edward Wilson back in the 1980s, and there's been a lot of landmark studies ever since, a lot of which have looked at hospital environments and looking at how nature or just a view of nature will speed up recovery times and reduce use of medications. Nature is not only making us happier and healthier, but it's also making us kinder and more generous. And we still have a long way to go, but I think there is an inherent separation right now that I think we can and should address, just in the ways we are, fully reliant on mechanical systems for air circulation and temperature regulations. We're still hooked up to life support systems, basically, right? And then also the social aspects of this. How can the residential environment really bring us closer together? And that's something that Scandinavian residential architecture has really been taking seriously for a long time, of really investing in these common spaces where it's not private and it's not public, but it's something in between. And a sense of connectedness, leads to happiness. So there's this direct link between how connected you feel with the people around you and how happy you feel.
Yeah, and the connection with people and the connection with nature, we are finding to be so much more significant and taken for granted and almost dismissed in urban settings. And that's a great segue into Jan Christian, the outdoor community space, connecting us with nature, connecting us with one another. It's going to be so valuable now going forward in the future, especially in urban spaces, densely populated spaces such as New York City, where we will want to gather, but be safe and have distance. Of course, Vestra can foster that. How do you see the future of urban spaces expanding to allow these natural habitats and these community spaces that are just outside the residential neighborhood to bring that together, such as the open house? How do people living in those neighborhoods and in those communal residences go and congregate into these community public spaces and enjoy one another and connect with nature, be present, but be autonomous as well?
Yeah. And I have to say, I loved Andrea's project. And I think this is exactly how we have to plan for our future cities. We know certain things. We are more people living on the planet now, and more people are moving into the big cities. So obviously, more people have to share less space, meaning we have to rethink how we design and how we build our cities. And we as human beings and designers and city planners, or even architects, landscape architects, and even furniture makers like myself, we can actually choose what kind of world we want to live in. It's not something that's just happening around us. We actually have the power and the tools to decide about our future. And I think people should raise up now and actually demand better everyday lives in their neighborhoods. We are seeing a lot of great projects now around the world, for instance, where having more space for greenery for people. I mean, more space for pedestrian plazas, for instance. Look what Snøhetta did at Times Square. That's an amazing project. So we will see more car-free city zones. We will see more greenery. We will see more pocket parks, places where people can enjoy fresh air, even nature in the city center of a big city like New York or wherever it is. And again, as I said, I think maybe the most important task for us now is to actually bring people together, even in a 6 feet world as we're living in right now because of COVID-19. We still have the same need to interact with other people. We should also plan for a time after COVID-19 where we can get back to basics again and back to the real life. I hope if everyone now follow the guidelines, they should, we should, you should, so we can get through this as fast as we can. We will get back to our everyday lives. And the biggest task then is to design the cities where people feel togetherness and where we build mutual trust between people, so we have a less polarized world and a less polarized society. And again, we have the tools. We can make this into a very existential big discussion, or we can focus on the very specific things we can do. For us, for instance, as a furniture company, we ask ourselves the questions: how can we actually contribute, or how can we make a difference? How can we play a role? So we have decided, for instance, that we refuse to do any so-called hostile designs. For instance, benches with those spikes or other obstacles they put on the benches to prevent homeless from sleeping there. And that's because we really don't believe in such a society. If we have created a society where people cannot afford a home or have a bed, that's something we should deal with by politics and social services and so on. It's not my task as a Norwegian furniture designer or furniture producer to install public benches in public ground with spikes and other obstacles, which only has one purpose, of course, and that is to prevent the weakest members of the society to enjoy our public parks. I simply not believe in that idea, so we have said that, okay, we refuse to do those projects, meaning we turn down many projects a year. Could have been very profitable for us as a private company to, say yes to those projects and kind of do it with our eyes shut. But we simply not believe in such a society, so we refuse to do it. And I think if we can get more private companies, more designers, more architects, more landscape architects, more city planners and industrial designers, and all of us to actually stand up for what we believe is the right thing to do and say, yes, we want this society. No, we don't want this society, and actually do the right things. I think we have a lot of power together to actually change the world and to build more inclusive cities where everybody hopefully have equal opportunities to live their lives.
My God, yeah, that's incredible. To take that stand is very brave. And also, it makes total sense. If you're creating a society where they have nowhere else to go, then creating a place where they can't even be in the places you force them isn't really very fair. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And similarly, how your furniture also is durable enough. I know like urban skate parks are a controversial thing. And so that's a sense of play that is being eliminated for teenagers and young adults. But your outdoor furniture seems to foster even that. Like while it's useful for sitting, I've also seen skateboarders and freestyle bikers using the furniture and without complaint by you or anybody else. So yeah, that's incredible. This, again, inclusive value to the way you design furniture right through what kind of projects you take on, which is a great segue also to, and Rachel, tell us a little bit about the library in Calgary. We had talked about inclusivity as well there and access. With the spiked furniture, access to education is also a barrier to an inclusive society. And what you've created in this space is open access to the public. Tell us a little bit about that and how you see, again, these public spaces fostering connection, fostering education going forward in a COVID-concerned world.
Yeah, so that project was interesting because it had to replace the existing Central Library of Calgary. Calgary, a rapidly expanding city. The site we were given was bisected by a curved light rail that kind of diverted two parts of the city, the downtown and the East Village. So it was a psychological and a physical challenge to bridge that gap, to bring these two parts closer together and open up the library, making it accessible to the entire city. So what we did was an architectural solution in a way where we kind of went with it. The building was curved. What it doesn't have a dominant facade. So it's basically open to all the sites, which is a very nice way to engage with the neighborhood beyond. We positioned the entry to the space in the center. So it's going to be the heart, the welcoming heart of this place. The landscape is terraced and a little lifted up, again, prioritizing pedestrians and not the cars. It's a very important thing we're trying to do with a lot of our projects, just thinking about pedestrian versus, the cars. We had a client that very early on wanted the entire design team, everybody to reach out to the community beyond, really understand what is to be replaced, the old existing library, a very beloved building in the heart of the city, and making sure that this new building doesn't keep people out. So the sense of being accessible in many ways. So physically and most importantly, emotionally accessible to the city, the neighborhood, the people beyond was at the core of this project. And once you go into the building, you just understand the entire building. It's open. You have visibility through the building. The program is organized on a spectrum from fun to more serious, the higher you go up to. The library these days is really more like doing the job of a community center, if you will, where people from various corners of the city, ages come together. It's really not just about the books. It's also providing services. Like there's tons of study rooms and community rooms and most important, computers for people that just don't have devices. But on the other hand, I also wanted to say, it's interesting, the discussion we had pre-COVID was about mobility or what it does to the cities. if there's perhaps less cars or a different way of getting around, and all these potentials of parking spaces and what it could mean and what we could do with these open spaces. And now a lot changed. And I mean, I'm looking outside my window and I see all these restaurants having all these impromptu outdoor spaces, you know, streets starting to get shut down. Stuff that's been happening in certain European countries, like the outdoor life is becoming a bit more important. And, you know, it goes to that thing Jan was saying, you know, like more people on less space. How do you manage that? It's encouraging to see that New York, you know, a city that doesn't really even has a lot of balconies, now has to start to rethink some of those principles. So yeah, I'm very curious where it's going. I hope it's not just a temporary thing. Some of the solutions are not just temporary to this situation, but I hope it's understood that you can just do much more.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And thank you for mentioning that mobility piece. Yeah, in Copenhagen, I think it was in the 60s when they controversially started that pedestrian mall, Europe's longest pedestrian mall. And it was a big problem. People did not like it. Now people love it. Yeah. And it's one of the best things about the city. New York City itself did block off bits of Broadway just years ago to try and implement something like that and see how people respond and what those changes might bring about. And obviously it's created space, like you mentioned, these restaurants having to move outdoors. It's allowed for that to sort of happen now that we've been experiencing it a little bit. So, and then even the control of alcohol, Savannah, Georgia, you can walk around with a cup in your hand and enjoy yourself. One of my favorite things about Copenhagen was the fact that I could have a beer and sketch outside. Right. It was a very luxurious, wonderfully creative experience, and also fostered connection with perfect strangers. So yeah, that is a very important piece. And as you mentioned with the library, and I wanted to get to this idea too, because I think it, again, cascades across all of your projects, is the shape of things that when you walk into the building, there's an intuitive understanding of how to use that building and a welcoming or a not welcoming, depending on how that's designed. And thinking outside of the box, quite literally, in New York, we have a lot of spaces that maximize capacity, but don't necessarily create a human experience of welcoming and an intuition of wayfinding, which the library achieves, and certainly the Opera House climbing up around that roof. You just know where to go, and every moment is a turn and a delight and a shape and a new thing to experience that really communicates the city itself of Oslo. Jan Christian, could you talk a little bit about how the shape of things in the design of your outdoor furniture compels people to intuitively understand how to use it, or perhaps create new experiences around those pieces of furniture that are maybe not as obvious?
Yeah, and that the last part out there is really important, because sometimes it's actually a good thing if furniture is not intuitive, because that encourages people to use them in new ways to interact with other people. So, but I just wanted to add something also, because I totally agree with and Rachel and you, Garrett, also in terms of this COVID situation now. And I think if we can allow ourselves to say that we might get at least one positive experience out of this, is the fact that this transition now towards greener and more inclusive cities is accelerating, because we are forced to rethink now. In a 6-feet world, we are forced to rethink. So what was not possible to do just a couple of months ago, it's now something we have to do. And people will get used to this new reality now. They will appreciate the fact, as you said, Anne Rachel, that you have, I mean, in your local neighborhood, you have restaurants, bars, people are enjoying the pedestrian areas, they are taking back the streets. And, you know, when people get used to this, it's very difficult for the politicians to force us back to what we had before. So I think if we use this right now, this can actually help us in the transition towards greener and more inclusive cities, which we have been waiting for many years. The fact that Snøhetta, together with Times Square Alliance, for instance, managed to close down parts of Broadway to give more space for pedestrian plazas. I think you created 5 pedestrian plazas there, bringing a lot of more people. Actually, the results are amazing. People love it. Even the shops love it, because they have more people coming to their shops now and stores when they're actually a space for people, not only cars. But the fact that you actually managed to do that is incredible in the city like New York, where people are so much love their cars. But I mean, if you manage to do it there, that gives me a lot of hope what we can achieve together in other parts of the world. And then, Gareth, back to your question. For us, when we design new furniture, and we are in a very lucky, happy situation that we actually can collaborate with prominent industrial designers, furniture designers, landscape architects, city planners in many countries. So we are always looking for new bright ideas, and we are always developing new products together with them. We always try to challenge what a bench should look like and what a bench should do. So, of course, we have traditional benches where two people can sit next to each other as well, but that's not what we are actually keen to produce. We want to produce social infrastructure or social objects where people come together in all kinds of different ways. So, for instance, at Times Square, together with Snøhetta, we developed an entirely new range of stackable chairs so people can move them around and create their social zones as they want to. And we also brought in another object, which is called Stoop. It's like a stair. It looks like a stair more than a bench. And that's an installation where actually 9 people can sit together. You can bring your laptop, you can lay on it, you can lean on it, you can jump on it, you can climb on it, you can enjoy your meal there. Children can do whatever they want as when their parents are watching them and talking to each other and so on and so on. So this idea of using street furniture as a tool to bring people together, I think is extremely important, not only to us, but for most landscape architects and furniture designers as well. I said it several times, but the world already has more than enough park benches. What we really need now is more social installations where people can actually interact, get to know each other, where we respect each other and treat each other as one big we instead of us and them. I have to be really honest with you, Gareth. When I took over this company at an age of 25, because my father got cancer and passed away, so suddenly a 25-year-old young guy like myself, that this was 8 years ago then. But suddenly I had the responsibility, and to be honest, as a 25-year-old boy, I was not thinking too much. Let's put it that way, too much about street furniture. But I was very engaged in society and in all kinds of political issues. How can we create a better society? How can we involve more people? How can we actually make this world a better place for everybody? So at that time, I decided that I want to use Vestland not as a tool to become rich or famous or to earn a lot of money, because I don't, maybe I shouldn't say it, but I don't care about money as long as I can live a happy life. I decided to use Vestra as a tool to actually change the world and to do something for the greater good. And I think in our company, we all share this philosophy that it's not about the furniture. It's not about the manufacturing. It's not about the profit margin. It's actually about bringing people together and use the furniture as a tool for something. And that's exactly what Andreas is doing and Snøhetta is doing. And I think a lot of designers, not only Nordic designers, I mean, we share those values all across the globe, but we should encourage more companies and more designers, more architects to think like this, because imagine how powerful we can be all together then.
Absolutely. There are a lot of companies that do think that way, but I don't think enough necessarily. I mean, we do still see a lot of companies designing for the sake of selling more stuff, and it's not necessarily to better people's lives. And I think it is so important that you made that decision at such a young age and that you were already very socially conscious at 25, which isn't necessarily, kind of might go the other way. You're more enterprising at 25 than socially conscious. The fact that you brought that to Vestra is a really amazing part of your approach and how you rose into that position at such an early time in your life. Well, we were talking about the shape of things, and I wanted to get to Andreas, because Andreas did design, again, in the open house, but also the hexagonal living in dignity spaces, also inclusivity for the homeless. Those are all interesting shapes and spaces. Again, you're considering the emotional effect of shape on the people in those living quarters. So tell us a bit about how, like, the rounded shape of the corners and walls and walkways and even this hexagonal living space for the homeless to bring them back into society, how those might affect those people emotionally and really build connection again.
Yeah, I just want to first quickly just jump back and really sort of add on to the previous topic we explored, which I think is so important. Like in the current time we're now, where we are recovering from this crisis, I think it's so important that we we really take the time and to take stock of what's going on. Like a crisis of this magnitude will always call attention to the structural weaknesses of society, right? And really highlight where the issues lie. So it's a time for us to really try to spot those and really know where to focus our efforts moving forward, right? So you see the COVID mortality rate, for example, like the way that it affected Hispanic and Black people, the rates were like double that of white here in New York City, really shows us the contours of the economic inequalities and the structural racism that happens in this part of the world. And of course, the reality is that the health implications are affecting some groups of society harder than others by design, right? Like the transmission and the ways that the virus was spreading was a result of how we organize our cities and our spaces, right? So if you live in a high density housing project, you're not able to physically follow the guidelines of social distancing, for example, right? So yeah, homelessness is an issue that's been growing quite explosively here in New York City, right? You currently have about 60,000 people without a home. And New York City is also one of the few places in the States that have a right to shelter mandate, meaning that if you don't have a home, you have a right to shelter. The many people I spoke with, the homeless people I spoke to during this design process, prefer to live on the streets. They didn't feel safe, or there was the issues of hygiene and theft in the current shelter systems. So what was lacking more than anything was perhaps like an individual space that would give both a physical and a psychological sense of a home, right? Which I think is so important. Another issue with New York with regards to homelessness is that while there is this right to shelter, you typically will have to wait quite a bit of time before you actually can find a more permanent solution. You might wait 9 months up to a year before you actually qualify to get somewhat of a semi-permanent housing solution. So there is this giant gap in that people are sort of left to themselves for extended periods of time that this project is trying to respond to. And it is also trying to leverage these leftover spaces of the city. You know, in New York City, the cost of land are so monumental that you are immediately displaced out of the centers of the city. James Gibson, the psychologist, was speaking about affordances, right? Mainly functional affordances, like the sort of preconceived ideas of how you use a product or a space. I think it's important to not sort of, control how these things should be interacted with, but instead sort of enable use. Like give that decision to the people who are using the products, right? And then you, of course, also have the sort of emotive or emotional affordances, how geometry and shape can actually impact your level of wellness and productiveness or happiness within a space, which is, dovetailing with research in environmental psychology and cognitive neuroscience, right? Where you're able to understand at a much deeper level how these shapes will affect you. As an architect, we've always been struggling with being able to rationalize form, right? Like it's typically coming from this blurry, ephemeral, aesthetical place. But I think these findings allow us to actually quantify these things as well, of like showing that there is direct correlation between the shape of the place and the social dimension of what it feels like to be in a space. So I think this is as I see it, kind of a very exciting game changer for architectural design when you're able to access these new sets of metrics.
It's interesting, exactly, that there's not really just one public. There's the publics, right? The space has to serve diverse public, and it has to rely to a certain degree of the self-discovery of people. So it's important that you listen, you understand what people want, but you also have to understand there's not only just one voice, and that you're also not just over-engineer the use potential of a space. And you have to accept that the use may change anyway. So you do have to leave a little bit of, gray areas in there. So it really can change to the necessarily changes over time. I think that's very important. What Jan was saying also with his step bench, we had that in our office to try it out before installing it at Times Square. And we were like, you sit there, you eat there, you step up there, you stand up there. That stepped platform, it has so many opportunities. It's so great. It's a Times Square where you're at the bottom of this huge valley. You want to elevate again people. You give them something to stand up a little bit and have this overview. This sense of discovery. I mean, I do find that is so interesting, and it's something, you know, sometimes we try to do also with our projects where, you know, at the Opera House or Alexandria, the facade, Calgary, the wood pieces, just all these things you can step on, touch, look at. It has an intimate scale. It has a human scale to it. And it also talks about you inhabiting space for a little moment. You know, like when you step on that plaza, that roof, this is your space right now, just for that brief little moment.
I love that. Changing the idea of a known thing to a sense of discovery. I mean, even this idea of cocooning, we had been talking about how children love to find little places where they can tuck underneath the table, you know, in the bathtub with their pillows, like creating unlikely experiences in the space that doesn't belong with that task. And you do a great job with that in so many ways, like the deer observation structure. On the inside, it's got this undulated wooden sculptural seating space that just visually is an experience in and of itself, but also creates this cocooning sense of being one with nature and then observing this vast expanse. And since you mentioned, again, that experience of delight and human touch and scale, with the museum exhibitions you had been working on with San Francisco MoMA and the Guggenheim, I mean, we know it's, again, a strange structure that offers delight and discovery in its unconventional shape. How are you bringing that into the exhibition space and then using architecture and what you know of cross-disciplinary approach to design and humanity into those moments of discovery and learning?
I was just the other day reading the conversation between Jettel and Craig, two of the founding partners, and Hans Ulrich Obrist, the Serpentine Pavilion curator. And Hans Ulrich Obrist is talking about this little story that happened when he was in London and he took a taxi. And the taxi driver was saying, "Oh, you work for the Serpentine Gallery. I was hoping to finally run into someone because I have this little story. The other day I was in, I think, Kensington Gardens with my daughter and she ran away and I had to go behind her and I noticed she went into the pavilion." And Hans Ulrich was saying, "Well, would you have seen the exhibition otherwise?" And I was like, "No, that was totally happenstance, totally accidental. I did not think this exhibition would have been for me. This kind of structure would have been for me." So how do you find a vocabulary or a way to actually break down these barriers?
Especially in the fine art setting, again, like education, fine art and artful experiences can be very intimidating. So if you want to bring people in and connect people to that sense of art, which I think is also as cathartic as being experienced with nature, allows us to express ourselves as a people and understand one another, to welcome people to the artistic experience where they don't feel intimidated and where they don't feel they have to have an academic degree to understand that experience, is a really amazing thing. And I think a transforming perspective in exhibition design. So it's really cool that you've been able to work on those projects and democratize that. We had talked about the triple bottom line just a little bit and profitability. It was Vestra, especially, that had talked about not just the fiscal benefits, but the social and environmental benefits of design. How do you measure those metrics? What are those KPIs? How do you know you're having social impact? How do you know you're having an environmental impact through great design?
Actually, Garrett, it's not that difficult, but some people, especially the economists, or at least a few of them, they try to make it more complicated than it is, because, you know, some of them believe that the KPIs belong to them, sort of. But it's not difficult to track and trace. Actually, for instance, the environmental impact could be in terms of CO2 emissions, energy consumption, how much renewable energy are we actually producing, how do we reduce the climate impact on the materials we use, how can we increase the lifespan of the products. I mean, that's hard for us because we already have a lifetime warranty on our products. But let's say that if you are manufacturing bad products destroyed after 2 years or 3 years, you can have a KPI saying that you should increase your range of products with a long lifespan. Of course, for Vestre, we try to figure out how many caring meeting places we create every year. We also work very hard on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, at least 9 of them, which we have integrated in our business philosophy. We do a lot of social projects all around the world, actually, so we can define both targets, KPIs, but also track and trace, for instance, how many people with so-called gaps in their CVs do we include, providing safe jobs, how many young people can we actually make sure that have an education, because we support UNICEF and a lot of other organizations to promoting education for children, especially in poor countries, and so on and so on. So it's not difficult at all if it's very important to measure. But I will also say that sometimes in private companies, maybe we care too much about what we can count, and what we can put the price tag or some kind of number on. Because again, if we just do the right things, meaning involve ourselves in projects we actually believe in and ask ourselves the question, will this specific project lead us to a better world or not? If we are actually asking ourselves those questions, I'm not so sure if we need all those KPIs, to be honest. But for very KPI oriented based companies, there's not the problem at all to find someone. If they have challenges finding KPIs, they can call me whenever and I can try to help them out. I read an article a few years ago written in New York Times. It was actually written by Milton Friedman. He's one of the most famous economist in the world, and he said that the social responsibility of private business is to increase our profits. And I mean, he said that that's our only social responsibility, meaning as long as we are profitable and make a lot of money, we don't need to think about the environment or social dimensions or so on. And I think that approach has led us into a world we are facing today with 800 million people living in extreme poverty. We are facing a climate crisis, and the climate crisis, it's actually a resource crisis because we produce way too much, sorry to say, but shitty products, and then after a few years we produce more shitty products, throwaway solutions, and we get more and more and more rubbish, and we use more resources than the planet actually has provided us with. So I think we have to start by changing this mindset, saying that of course, as a private company, we need to be profitable because we are creating jobs. We have to invest in new technology. We should, of course, pay our taxes with a smile on our face and contributing to the society. But I'm saying that that's not enough today. As a business leader, no matter what we do, we have to actually do something else and something more than just being profitable. But what I'm very happy about is that we're seeing a revolution now. You see, especially among the millennial generation, they think completely differently. And young people today, they ask private companies, how can we actually save the world, instead of how much money do I earn, or how great career opportunities do I have. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to be quite optimistic and positive about the future now. I am, at least.
Absolutely. And that's a great perspective. We've been in a very limited form of thinking for a very long time that is left over from the Industrial Revolution of quantifiable outputs. And we're starting to see a more holistic framework that our world is much more vast and full of energy and full of other elements that we've been ignoring, and measuring those things, whether we do that by data or intuition, which a private company has the luxury of doing, certainly becomes that profitability. And if you're willing to trust that intuition, knowing that I'm creating this product because I know it does a good job at what it's supposed to do, you don't necessarily need those measurable KPIs to know that you're doing a great job. And you're absolutely right. This younger generation is going to be framing their businesses that way. It'll be a wonderful thing to see. And Rachel, do you have thoughts on that contribution, and how does Snøhetta see this triple bottom line as being vital to business?
So, for example, Times Square, right? There was a increase in public safety. If you want to have an economic positive effect, I think the rents increased, so that's a good thing for business. Pretty much all positive aspects in that respect for the public and the economy, if you will, and the city, of course. Alexandria Library, for example, the gender balance from the staff and the visiting audience has been relatively balanced. That's obviously a very positive effect of having a space, again, that is more about gendering some of those ideas and being able to work with a client that can help facilitate that is quite amazing. It's not just about challenging ourselves, but challenging the client or the client challenging us, right?
It's incredible to think of a company of the size of Snowhead to being experimental on some of these projects, really taking an approach of the unknown on this, taking the road less traveled towards maybe this is more impactful in the environment, or maybe this is a better human experience, possibly expensive, but let's try this. And Andreas, I think your projects lend themselves in that similar way. They're experimental, they're solving wicked problems that perhaps profitable companies don't want to invest in or see it as risk investing in. What barriers do you see getting removed to help maybe do incubators or test launches of these things to test and scale and really bring these ideas to a fuller flesh service of humanity?
Like currently, I'm always operating more as a think tank, right? Well, I'm mostly interested in these more like longer term perspective projects of really asking the what if questions, and it's more almost like a double or 2.5 bottom line, where like the social and the environmental are the most important things. And I'm also quite fortunate to be very flexible in how I operate. Like I'm typically just working by myself and pulling in people and collaborators as needed. But the system approach to these is a very prevalent one, and sort of recognizing that everything around us are systems, like if it being cars or cells or humans or buildings, elements that are interconnected in such a way that there's a clear relationship between structure and behavior, but engage with these issues more holistically and recognize that none of these projects are islands, right? No building is an island, and not a bench is an island, but they're indivisibly connected with layers of context around it, be it socially, culturally, technologically, environmentally, right? So part of my ambition with Flamingo has been to explicitly acknowledge this and use this as a framework to guide the design process and the analysis process in order to maybe seek out and try to address some of these larger complex societal issues. So yeah, when you try to understand a thing like food insecurity or homelessness or loneliness, an easy answer would be to say that this is just a result of some bad lifestyle choices by a certain group of people. But that's flawed when you actually look at things and you see that these are results of larger issues, right? Like there's housing affordability gaps, there's cutback on housing assistance, and above all, like inequality that's driving these things. There's unequal access to education, unequal access to medical care, safety and security. So what I found, and maybe, is that the roadblock, the bottleneck is oftentimes, yes, it's political and economical, but above all, maybe ideological, like how things are perceived. In architectural design as well, I also found that same analogy to be very useful of understanding buildings as systems, or using modularity as an entry point, and which also allow you to deal with time as an actual design parameter. As we currently notice now, that it's impossible for us to really predict what's coming around the corner, right? Of like 10, 20 years ahead, like we have no clue. We can make some educated guesses, but I think the best thing we can do is to account for this unknown and really instill the ability to adapt and the ability to evolve and change with needs and requirements.
This idea that the world is known and that we know what is to be known, and that we've designed so long under conditions that we can predict to some degree with certainty and success. Now, like you pointed out, there's a lot we don't know that's just around the corner, much less 10 years off. And as designers, we're creating environments and products and graphic experiences and human-centered products that will live with us for a very long time into the future, while we don't know what their fully purpose is going to be or whether they fulfill the need. And I know that some of the approach with Norwegian architecture especially takes into account the site that it will be built on. And I found that very interesting. I know with Snøhetta, you've done so many projects like this where you take in the site and build according to what's around it and make something absolutely unique to that space that you wouldn't be able to necessarily build somewhere else. And here in New York City, again, we build for efficiency, we build for square footage, we build for capacity. When you're talking about site-specific problem solving, also community-specific needs in the case of public furniture, how do each of you see designing when you can't see around the corner? Let's start with Jan Christian. We haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah, or maybe you should ask the real designers and architects about this. I mean, I'm a lawyer. Since you asked me, I can give a short answer. I think we should not be that scared of testing out new stuff. I think that could help us a lot. You know, we have to unleash all the creativity that we share together. And that being said, we know a lot about the future. Again, we know that we are more people populating this planet, more people are living in the big cities. We know that we have to do something about the climate changes. We have to reduce the income gap between people. Too many people are living in extreme poverty. This cannot continue this journey any longer. So I think the combination of actually doing something about it, real action instead of just talking on it, and be a bit more flexible and open-minded and willing to take risk and to test certain things. I think that's a great combination. And I would also like to add one very important thing, and that is international collaboration. Yes. We need international collaboration more than ever before to solve the really big major issues we are facing today. I mean, Norway cannot do this alone, US cannot do it alone, EU cannot do it alone, but if we collaborate, if we join our forces, we can actually accomplish something really great together. And we have said a lot of nice things today about Nordic values and about how Nordic architecture, Nordic design DNA kind of impact our surroundings. But I would like to say that the home country of creativity, Garrett, that's actually your country, US. I love US. I really want to go back to New York. That's my favorite city as fast as I can now. So, I mean, if we join the forces in the American creativity, maybe with Nordic values, equal opportunities, and so on, I think a combination of that would be really great. So collaboration between countries, but also within countries, no matter if you're a designer, architect, landscape or architect, or maybe furniture king as myself, I think we can work together to sort out some of the big issues today.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. I didn't want to get too one-sided here. And I absolutely agree with you. Regardless of country origin or philosophy or values, it's true. In order to solve these problems, everybody needs to be able to work together and bring their perspectives to the table. Combining it with those values of human interest and that other aspect to the triple bottom line might optimize those things in a really compelling way that we haven't seen yet. And Rachel, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more on the global collaboration. I'm always saying we have a global practice. We have very strongly established local offices, Oslo, New York, Innsbruck, Hong Kong, Paris, Australia. So these are not just satellite projects. These are people from there working, having a much better understanding of what's going on in their areas of the world. And especially right now, within a global pandemic, they have already perhaps gone through certain things for years in Asia or for a few weeks in Europe. There's a lot of good stuff out there. We can just kind of learn and give ourselves already a bit of an advantage. And then, of course, taking into all the local idiosyncrasies and all that stuff, of course, we have to, shape it to the local condition. But yeah, I come from a country that is surrounded by mountains and it's small. So we have to always look out kind of, what's out there because, like just doing that one tunnel vision thing is not really going far. So yeah, you need to see what your neighbors are doing, right? And help and try to adapt and see what works for you and utilize this advantage other countries, people, neighborhoods, communities already gone through.
Totally. And that's a very good point. If we were willing to learn what other people are doing and how they're implementing these systems, and then to adapt those systems into other groups of society and scale those needs, learn, test, scale, learn, test, scale. Like you mentioned, the mobility thing and having pedestrian spaces in urban settings, seeing how other cities like Copenhagen are doing that, how they're achieving that. And while you may be implementing those systems into new cultures, and there may be changes to that culture that maybe make that not quite transferable, but we can change it a little bit and make it work for that culture. But that's something we have to be able to do in a very collaborative way. And there's so much sharing of information. There's no reason we can't do that on a global scale at this point. Andreas, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, an interesting question. Longevity and like how do you stay relevant for longer periods of time? I think the best we can do is to sort of accept that, but then fold in the ability to change with the time. So, for example, I think many of us have been stuck in our homes for months now, and our homes have to take on new identities, new roles, and new functions. Right? They have to become offices, they become schools, they become gyms, what have you. So I think like this open-endedness that allow spaces to change is going to be key. Again, of enabling use and not controlling it and really dictating use. I also think quality is an important point to make. Like if something is made in a high quality way and really made special, the people will take care of it as well, right? And it would have a longer life just by the mere fact that it's a high quality space or high quality product. And that goes back to our initial chat about collaboration and really approaching design with the user in mind and designing with the user and ensuring that the design objectives are actually corresponding to what one needs and wants.
Often in new business pitches, we're asked, so how do you make a truly environmental friendly project? And sometimes we say, look, if you really want to do that, you do not build. So understanding the second we do something, it has to be deliberate. It has to be thoughtful. It has to have high quality. It has to have longevity. There's that responsibility we want to bring to that.
So in summary, we've got perspectives on intuitive design, collaboration, cross-disciplinary insight, thinking outside of the box, creating social monuments instead of sculptural monuments, human experiences centered around intuitive connection, not telling people how to experience the design, but allowing people to discover design, and fostering delight, connection, joy, and the human experience in public spaces. Thank you all again so much for sharing your perspectives on these projects and on cross-disciplinary design. I have one last question for you. As we know, Scandinavia is suspected of being the happiest area of the world with the happiest people. So in final conclusion, I'd love to ask you, are you happy and what makes you happy? Jan Christian, would you want to answer?
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yes, of course. Thank you for asking, Garrett. That was very kind of you. And yes, I'm a happy guy. I'm happy when I can spend time with friends and family, and when I have the feeling that I can actually contribute to something that's important for other people.
And from what I've seen of Vestra and the areas that I've traveled, I've noticed an immense sense of delight the minute I see it. Just the color and the composition and the fact that it's there. It does emit delight in its experience just in encountering it. So I feel like your happiness in your life is cascading towards the products that you create in the world. And Rachel, are you happy and what makes you happy?
Right now, being able to have access to an outside space, it's a privilege. I understand that a lot of people don't have that actually. Yeah, so I have moments of happiness.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something we're learning from this situation is that this flexibility of our work-life balance and working from home, working remotely, working from the office and working in different ways has shown us some areas of being happier, being able to work, be productive, and be happy at the same time. We have been very challenged at in the last 30 years, I'd say. So that's a great point. Andreas, are you happy and what makes you happy?
Yeah, I think in general I'm a happy guy. I'm quite optimistic by nature. But yeah, this is a difficult time. Like we're stuck at our homes and as we touched on earlier, like I think social interaction and sense of connectedness is inherently what makes us happy. So I think it's, in general, is taking a toll, being isolated. But yeah, still a pretty happy guy.
Awesome. What makes me happy truly is great design. And that may sound trite, but honestly, when I experience something unexpected, something that's highly functional, something that lives with me for a long time, whether that's an art experience at a museum or a piece of furniture, I'm truly delighted by that. And a lot of Norwegian design has been making me happy. So great design, I think, can make humanity a happier group for the future. Thank you all for participating in this. This has been such a great conversation.
Thank you, Garrett and Rachel, Jan, and Andreas. You have made me very happy. Through your creativity, you've maintained your human side, and you understand your contributions to society must be supportive and long-lasting. I dream of a day when all of us look at our world with discerning eyes and work to make it better with humanity and nature at heart. And thank you all for joining us. Tomorrow we present part 2 of Norway Design, a discussion with an international perspective. So until then, please stay safe, stay smart. Design stands together.